Welcome back to my ranking of all 42 episodes of Transformers Animated. Today we're going to cover the top 50% of the show, the best of the best, starting with number 21, Decepticon Air. Is Decepticon Air an episode with any deep character work? No. Does it have emotional moments? Is it thematically rich? No and no, but it's just fun as hell. When you've had as many dramatic episodes as Transformers Animated has, you've earned the right to just do an homage to the Nicolas Cage film Con Air and have Optimus Prime sneaking through air ducts to fight 5 of the most entertaining Decepticons in the show, including Swindle, who's just at his best as he always is.
Remove these stasis cuffs at once!
All in good time. First, we need to discuss compensation. You get freedom, but what do I get?
And that's what I appreciate about Transformers Animated and the creative team behind it. They could have just picked up with these Decepticon prisoners in jail the next time we saw them. This episode is completely irrelevant to the overall story of the season, with the exception of Lugnut joining Megatron in the last 10 seconds.
So, now we're picking up hitchhikers?
But someone at some point said, hey, we have all of these Decepticon prisoners on this flagship going into space. This is an opportunity to homage the Nicolas Cage film Con Air. And then they just did it for fun. And I love that this was a show that was willing to do that. Sorry's inexplicable ability to activate a space bridge is a little hokey.
Sorry, how did you know what to do?
I don't know. I just kinda did.
There's a 0% chance the show would have elaborated on that once it got around to revealing her origin, let's be real. But that moment aside, Decepticon Air is yet another gem from the 3rd season, which makes up for its simple story and less than stellar animation, with wildly entertaining writing and an incredibly inspired premise.
Brilliant idea, just brilliant. Oh, of course it's brilliant. It was my idea to begin with.
Right here at number 20.5 is where I'd put the outline for the 4th season's premiere, The Trial of Megatron. Although this outline would have evolved a lot before its final product, the bare-bones skeleton lays out a lot of character work and story progression that's worth discussing. The most significant part of this to me is the continuation of Bumblebee's desire to serve in the Elite Guard, as established in Auto Boot Camp. For years, I'd always envisioned Bee achieving that goal as the end game of his character arc. The Disney route. He serves in the Elite Guard as we end the series. But here we learn that it would have been completely absolved in this 4th season premiere, as Bumblebee realizes his friends are more important to him than serving in the Elite Guard. And he opts to cast that status aside. He realizes that his lifelong dream just truly wasn't what was best for him, the Pixar route. It just feels so right for the tone and the anti-bureaucratic themes of Transformers Animated. And it just shows that Marty Eisenberg knows what is best for these characters. The Trial of Megatron had a lot happening, but as far as we can tell from this outline, it would have been juggled a lot better than the 3rd and 2nd season's finales. A lot of it feels very organic and natural.
Organic and natural.
Like Sentinel making a deal with Megatron. Oh my god, we were robbed. We were robbed. But a lot of it is also very hokey and forced in by Hasbro, like Ironhide joining the main cast. This would be like if Star Wars Return of the Jedi removed Leia from the principal cast and replaced her with Forlom. Ironhide's literally an extra. There are a lot of these Hasbro brand synergy requests, like Bulkhead leaving the main cast, that I disagree with on a fundamental level. Even more so now that we've seen the original plans for Season 4 before Hasbro interjected. And these do hurt my perception of the trial quite a bit, although the unfulfilled potential and my desire to see what could have been propels it pretty damn high up, all things considered. Now we'll stop talking about it because it doesn't actually exist. You might not realize this, but Transformers Animated ended after Season 3.
Wow. I didn't know that. You're telling me now for the first time.
Number 20, Transformed Rollout Part 1. The very first episode of Animated does a genuinely incredible job at introducing the 5 very distinct main characters and telling us just about everything we need to know about them in under 20 minutes.
Do you ever get the feeling you were programmed for something more than just repairing space bridges?
I got a diagnostics program that can delete that feeling like a bad line of code.
One of the most impressive things about the show to me has always been the rock-solid team dynamic that Marty Eisenberg was able to craft, dating back to the series' production Bible. Every single character has things in common and things that bring them into conflict with each other. They're distinct, fully fledged characters, but more importantly, they're all perfectly catered to each other's strengths and weaknesses. He spent just as much time mapping out how these characters interact with and feel about each other as he did writing who they are individually. I know I expressed some gripes with Marty's scripts in the first half of this video during the lower ranked episodes, but this right here is the reason why I respect him so much and the reason I viewed him as a childhood hero. I used his production materials as a template when I created the team dynamics of my Transformers Combaticons pilot. I tried to emulate even a fraction of the thought he put into his work. The series premiere fully succeeded in showcasing almost all the character interplay he envisioned. Not only that, but it makes the audience fall in love with the characters as well, and I think it succeeds on all fronts. But even more impressive is that a lot happens. It's not uncommon for pilots or episode 1s to have thinner than usual stories to showcase the character dynamics as much as possible. See Transformers Combaticons, where the first 11 minutes intentionally has like 2 plot points. But in Rollout Part 1, there is a remarkably thick plot. A lot of characters are introduced, and it speaks volumes to Marty's talents as a storyteller. Where the episode also succeeds is the copious amounts of implied history between everything and everyone. The way they speak to each other, the way they interact with each other, you can tell that these characters all have history. But not just a basic, they're all friends! There's different kinds of history between the different characters. Clearly something more antagonistic between Prime and Sentinel.
Optimus Prime. You mean they still let you command other Autobots?
Don't start, Sentinel.
The talk between Magnus and Prime seems to indicate a history of mistakes and distrust. The main team, as presented in this first episode, comes across as a group of co-workers. They know each other, but don't seem to have any particular passion in each other's existence, with the exception of Bumblebee and Bulkhead who clearly have a kinship. It's a slower episode, it's not an episode that reaches any of the heights of the duration of the series, just by its very nature, but it accomplishes everything it set out to do, and I consider it a textbook example of how to introduce an ensemble of characters in a rich world surrounding them.
I do not believe in luck.
Neither do I.
Number 19, Three's a Crowd. I genuinely love this one. This is the greatest Constructicon episode by a mile and is not even close. I think a big part of that stems from the fact that Mixmaster and Scrapper's grading personalities have been toned down to accommodate for Dirt Boss, who's a riff on a 1920s mob boss, a characterization that went well over my head as a kid. I specifically remember learning about the man in English class one day during sophomore year of high school and thinking to myself, holy shit, that's what Dirt Boss was talking about.
You ever try working for a living, Tiny? Taking orders from the man? Move this, move that. Well, forget about it.
Mixmaster and Scrapper are always depicted as somewhat sympathetic characters, but that's amplified here when Dirt Boss is mentally and physically abusing them. This episode makes you actually feel for them, rather than feel agitated that they're on the screen. But even through all that, Mixmaster and Scrapper still have a choice and they're continuing to make the wrong one.
Can't build a house without busting a few bricks.
It's just business, Mix. Nothing personal.
Previous episodes have ended on a hopeful, optimistic note that Mixmaster and Scrapper might change.
As long as they're not wearing Decepticon symbols, they still have a choice. Next time, let's hope they make the right one.
This episode, subversively, sees Bulkhead finally give up on them. There's only so many times you can stand by and try to support someone when they refuse to listen to you and fall deeper down a rabbit hole of bad choices.
No one except me!
Oh, and how are you gonna stop us, huh, Bulky?
It's honestly really satisfying to see Bulkhead snap here. I'll always be curious how this character dynamic would have resolved by the end of the 4th season or end of the series. In the B-plot, the Autobots managed to capture Lugnut and then spend the entire runtime just trying to move him. I think it's very funny. It's way more memorable and specific than a generic time-padding battle like we got last time. This also gives way to the least important dangling thread of animated.
You promise me you will never speak of this to Megatron.
Oh, I promise.
Like, say we got a season 4, would Ramjet have actually gone up to Megatron at some point and been like, Lugnut didn't get captured one time? Megatron would be like, okay, like, would he even care? How would that be relevant to an episode whatsoever? Another reason this episode exceeds is that it has actual stakes. Mix and Scrap's previous episode saw them wandering pretty aimlessly across the city. This one's about Dirt Boss pilfering the entire city's oil supply. From the nighttime setting to the action climax surrounded by fire, Three's Crowd sent the Constructicon story thread in a far more compelling direction than it had been in the previous season.
We can't contain the fire!
A couple little quirks I find silly. In A Bridge Too Close, Bulkhead was actually mad, and Sumdac simply thought he was faking. Here, Bulkhead's faking being mad, and Sumdac thinks he's completely sincere.
I take back what I said before. You are worse than working for Megatron.
I don't think this is a callback or anything. I think it just tread really similar ground by coincidence. Secondly, Dirt Boss drains a tanker truck, and newspaper articles proceed to outline their crime spree and indicate a lot of time has passed. Then it cuts back to Bulkhead and Fanzone at the tanker still on the highway. So either all of those newspapers were printed in like 30 minutes, or this tanker truck just laid here for weeks before Fanzone arrived. And I like to pretend it's the latter because that would mean the Autobots spent a week trying to move Lugnut.
I so don't have time for this.
Number 18. Home is where the spark is. This is probably the quintessential episode of Transformers Animated. It's the first footage people saw of the show, and what incredible footage it was. The episode's propelled this high almost solely from its visuals alone, with some gorgeously fluid animation that the rest of the show wishes it could replicate. Sometimes the characters are lined with textured brushes. There's three-tone shading for most of the climax. And there's shots here that just don't look anything like the rest of the show in the best possible way. Fans generally agree that this is the best the show ever looked, but on Twitter once, Derek indicated that he doesn't consider this the best animated episode of the show, and then he never elaborated, and it hurts me that we'll never know his answer. The story is bare bones. It's another slow-paced entry early in the run that lets us a little further into Bumblebee and Prowl's minds and establishes their brotherly character dynamic, or gay, depending on how you see it. The episode's primarily designed to truly introduce us to the cunning and wit of Megatron, as well as the auto-assembly plant the Autobots call home, which is a character in and of itself with all its machinery and moving parts. There aren't necessarily any standout moments from this episode, but it's just one that makes you feel comfortable when you watch it. Makes you feel at home.
Be still. Focus. Relax.
I am all about stillness.
Right servo on orange.
Number 17 and 16. Megatron Rising, Parts 1 and 2. The best season finale of the lot, Megatron Rising has this genuine sense of dire urgency, as Megatron rallies his Decepticons in a last-ditch plan to restore his body. The blizzard and the snowy setting give this finale a very unique vibe and makes the episode so much more memorable than it would have if it were set during a generic grassy summer. Optimus is stressed out of his mind and agitated today, which is a side of him we've never really gotten to see before.
You stole the Dinobots and took them to an island?
The character drama is at its peak, and this is exactly what the second and third season's finales lacked. Strong characters pushing the story along with their choices.
I'm gonna find sorry.
Bumblebee, get back here!
Megatron Rising makes sure that its principal characters are not lost in the shuffle of its story. This conversation between Prime and Ratchet is irrelevant to the plot? No. But it's here to let these characters breathe, to let them soak in their situation and respond accordingly in the way these characters would.
Let the kid go.
Since when is insubordination acceptable, Ratchet? We have a job to do here, and we're supposed to work as a team.
Don't be so hard on them, Prime. We've all been fighting the good fight.
I know. We've all been pushed to our limit. But we can't just stand around making excuses. Not if we're going to survive.
Almost every story thread from the season comes back into play, although some are more relevant than others. Black Arachnia, for instance, does absolutely nothing. After her previous appearance where she realized the key won't cure her techno-organic side, she apparently developed Alzheimer's, because she's here to get the key again and do the same thing. Then she just walks in circles until Ratchet flicks her away. It's almost laughable how pointless her involvement is here. Sorry has 2 different line thicknesses in this shot, and it makes me mad. The Dinobots, too, refuse to help Optimus and then just disappear from the narrative. There was an extensive deleted scene from part 2 where the Dinobots fight alongside Optimus against Megatron. According to an old interview with Marty in 2008, the scene was animated, but it looked so bad that it was scrapped. We've never seen the animation, but me and my team are cooking, rest assured. More to the point, I think this scene absolutely should have remained because it makes the Dinobot side quest in part 1 retroactively pointless. It's set up without payoff. Like, how bad could it have possibly looked? There's no way in hell it looks worse than Season 3. The final battle, even without the Dinobots, is intense, dramatic, and a deeply satisfying payoff to the first season. The highlights will always be the fights with Lugnut and Blitzwing, with Bumblebee's insults and Blitzwing's idiotic falling from the sky repeatedly being among the comedic highlights of this entire series.
And who uses ice as a weapon? I mean, what are you, a refrigerator?
You want heat? I will give you more than you can handle! Oh, flag! Nada!
It's made even funnier when contrasted with the fact that Bulkhead takes out Lugnut with a singular punch in about 20 seconds.
You talk too much.
While not necessarily an issue with the finale, I think Megatron Rising highlights a problem with the season as a whole, that being the Autobots' passivity. All of these suspicious things have been happening in Detroit. Soundwave gaining sentience and controlling all robots in the city, Lugnut and Blitzwing arriving to Earth and looking for something, Nanosec bringing Destronium to an unknown location.
Destronium? Why would a small-time crook want to steal Destronium?
The fact that they didn't start to become suspicious makes them look dumb as hell. Like, how hard could it have possibly been to squeeze a confession out of Nanosec? No one asked him why he was stealing Destronium. I think the season would have been stronger if the back half saw rise to an active game of cat and mouse, as they followed the trail to Sumdac Tower and got closer to finding the truth, increasing Megatron's desperation to escape. As it stands currently, Megatron's just like, I want to escape, in episode 4, and by episode 16 he's still just like, I want to escape, with no increase in urgency. I also think the season may have been more compelling if Sumdac's true nature were left ambiguous. If we weren't sure if Sumdac was aligned with Megatron or simply his puppet. The Autobots spend a lot of the show debating if they can trust him.
You guys don't really think my dad is working for Megatron, do you?
To be honest, sorry, I don't know what to believe.
Megatron must have been holding him hostage this whole time!
Or working with him this whole time.
And I think those conversations would hit home a lot more if we, the audience, shared that sentiment. Those qualms aside, none of which were even flaws with the episodes, rather the 14 that preceded it, Megatron Rising is a rewarding cap to a pretty damn strong inaugural season.
It will require using Bumblebee's greatest strength.
What, my stingers? My turbo speed?
Your obnoxious personality.
Number 15.
I consider Black Friday to be the spiritual precursor to Season 3's interconnectivity. It's the first major instance of multiple story threads all converging. Porter C. Powell's takeover of Sumdac systems, Black Arachnia's quest to cure herself, Meltdown's desire to create an all-organic transformer, and his connection to the Dinobots in the laboratory under their island. Not only that, it combines all of them in such incredibly smart ways. Powell was briefly shown as a financier of Biotech Unbound, Prometheus Black's company in Total Meltdown. The fact that he comes back into play shows how much attention Matt and Marty were paying to their world and all the countless chess pieces they had on the board. And I speculate that a good deal of credit should probably go to Matt Youngberg as well, given that his 2017 DuckTales reboot is the only show I've watched which achieves the same brilliant level of interconnectivity while remaining completely episodic. It took me until mid-season 2 to process that Matt Youngberg was Matt Youngberg, having spent the entire previous portion thinking, wow, this is just like animated. Black Arachnia seeking out Meltdown to remove her organic half due to his genetic research, and him in turn betraying her to remove her technological side, is a brilliant decision that takes full advantage of both of these characters' personalities and motivations. This is the best handling of Meltdown by far, because he's just a smaller cog in quite a grander machine, rather than a dry, wristless screen hog like he was in the first season. Black Friday shifts POV pretty rapidly. First it's B and Sorry visiting Meltdown, then it's a villain team up starring Meltdown, then it's Prowl exploring the island, then it's Optimus going on a buddy cop adventure with Grimlock, and from there Prime remains the leading man.
Me Grimlock go with you, but me Grimlock go with you alone!
I'd say it doesn't quite juggle everything as smoothly as it could, as smoothly as most Season 3 episodes will, but that doesn't take away from just how much this episode manages to do successfully.
What brilliant, insightful thought can you not wait to share with the rest of the world?
Number 14. Where is thy sting? This is a very bare bones, predictable story. I'll admit, maybe it's a little too high, but it's a comfort episode to me and one that I've watched many, many times. These 3 nighttime episodes in the 3rd season where the elite guard is on Earth hunting Wasp are probably the ones I've rewatched the most by far. They're my go-tos every time. And this one's very atmospheric, as rain and lightning surround everything. The scene where Wasp reveals himself to Bumblebee is downright terrifying, especially the moment where he takes off his helmet and reveals the skeletal machinery underneath. I really appreciate that they speak with each other's voices. That is to say, Tom Kenny is voicing Bumblebee, and Bumper Robinson is voicing Wasp.
It's not even fading. What kind of paint job is this? Traitor! Throw him in the stockade!
I think it highlights the level of rapport these actors have with each other, that they're able to settle into each other's characters so convincingly. Where Is Thy Sting is the introduction of Jetfire and Jetstorm. They do feel a bit shoehorned in. They're the only prominent named speaking characters who really don't do anything in the whole series. They're consistently just sort of there. This episode is really poorly animated, as is kind of typical for the middle of the 3rd season. The actual drawings are so sloppy this whole episode. It's very evident if you look at faces. That was supposed to be Prowl. I truly believe this one has the worst storyboarding of the show by far. Every shot is just a static, medium or long shot with no movement whatsoever.
Whoever wins this round of Ninja Gladiator has to be the real Bumblebee. Because he's the best player around.
This is ridiculous.
Well, if you've got a better idea, my auditory circuits are go.
Video games?
Wild, isn't it? Humans sure know how to make a scene.
It's the most stiff, motionless visual direction of all time. I think they realized how bad this looked, and that's why they went so hard with all the visual effects here. Everything's tied together by the absolutely batshit reveal of Ultra Magnus, beaten nearly to death by Shockwave. You don't understand how crazy this was as a kid. Yet another feather in the nobody's safe cap worn by Season 3. Shockwave's utter desperation was just becoming palpable by this point, and it seems like he was on a warpath to kill every single 1986 movie Autobot.
Wave.
Number 13. Along Came a Spider. When bringing the series together, Marty Eisenberg had this inspired idea to turn Black Arachnia, the villain from Beast Wars, into Optimus Prime's Catwoman. With this episode, he finally got the opportunity to tell that story, and what can I say? He cooked. It provides Optimus with a sad backstory akin to Ratchet's through these Lost-style flashbacks. Everything's set up and paid off at precisely the right times. The pace at which the flashbacks weave in and out is really perfect. It's a completely flawless script, frankly, except for this line, which is randomly the most cliche dialogue ever written.
That's not what I sound like. Is it?
Brianne Drew Hard designed this Halloween costume, and it's perfect. There's this bizarrely specific line that's a Marty-ism if I've ever heard one.
My friend Optimus Prime is gonna take his axe and chop you into itsy-bitsy spider burgers.
And I bring that up because it comes back in the very next episode.
The Autobots are gonna grind your army into itty-bitty bot burgers.
Which just tells you for a fact, Marty Eisenberg, as the story editor, wrote that line in Sound and Fury. There's no way that him and Henry Gilroy just coincidentally came up with such remarkably similar lines. I appreciate Along Came a Spider because it established that not every main character needs to be in every episode. Prowl and Ratchet are nowhere to be seen today, and from now on, characters can just be absent when they aren't relevant to a given story. This right here is the only time in the entire show that a fight with a Decepticon is super well animated. Most of the best looking episodes are very early in the show before the Decepticons show themselves. And by sheer bad luck, none of the remaining well animated episodes feature Decepticons. Almost every major Decepticon battle in TFA is plagued with janky, rushed drawings that don't hold a candle to Prime swinging at Black Arachnia right here.
Bulkhead, where'd you get that sheet?
It was just draped over some house. Weird place for a bedsheet, huh?
Oh, that's not a bedsheet, that's a fumigation tent.
Really? What's a fumigation tent?
Number 12. Garbage in, garbage out. This is probably the most outlandish and slapstick the show ever dared to get, and I'll always appreciate it. Everything about it is top-notch comedy in my opinion.
I am Redgar! I knocked things over!
From Megatron's eye twitch to the fact that Lugnut is apparently held together entirely by 2 screws.
I am... What am I?
But what could have been a fluff but forgettable story is made very sweet and poignant by Redgar's naivety and his earnest quest to find a purpose and an identity.
Excuse me? I was hoping you could tell me what I am.
There's something almost beautiful about the sentient pile of garbage trying to figure out why it's alive. Why are any of us alive? That's a really deep question for a toy-selling Transformers reboot to be tackling. And rather than getting up its own ass about it, it poses this question in the most outlandishly goofy episode. Weird Al was a perfect get. Every day I thank God that Eric Idle said no.
I know what I am now, and it's all thanks to you.
It's almost eerie how similar Redgar was in characterization and gimmick to the character Weird Al played a decade later, Milo Murphy.
I've got an extra pair, and they're hazmat rated for a level 4 biohazard.
Ratchet, this episode's protagonist, gets lost in the shuffle a bit, but given it's at the expense of more time with Redgar, it's probably worth it. I've seen it argued that Ratchet's character arc of overcoming his grumpiness and working on his people skills feels dangerously derivative of a similar arc in Lost and Found, but I think it's distinct enough to stand on its own, and is aided by the fact this is a very lighthearted, continuity-free episode, to overcome the fact that it may lack the emotional punch of the previous entry. This time, it doesn't need to hit the same. In Lost and Found, Ratchet secretly confesses that he cares to someone he cares deeply about. This time, he's willing to change his attitude for the good of the city and for the good of a stranger. He is selflessly making a sort of sacrifice this time, which he wasn't in the previous instance.
Don't let others tell you what you are. You can be any bot you wanna be.
You mean I can be a hero?
Redgar's sacrifice, meanwhile, made me so sad as a kid. The quickest way to make someone care is to make them laugh, and this episode weaponizes that to make its climax really heartfelt. This is among the best this series has to offer, and we're not even in the top 10 yet.
Don't worry, kid! I'll pull you out!
Number 11, Headmaster. Once again, this is one of the most consistently funny episodes of Transformers Animated.
I cracked that little vid sim for the learning impaired. Domination Station! Total wasteland!
Bulkhead seeks a creative outlet and becomes an artist, which is another really cute wrinkle to a character who most Transformers shows would have been content leaving one-dimensional. While the animation's pretty average, the general art direction and drawings here are wonderful. It's another episode where the Answer Studio's distinct style really shines through, with a bunch of shots that look like they were drawn with chalk and charcoal. This is the first time in this video we're addressing the character of the Headmaster, and I have to sit here and say it, I am this character's strongest supporter. He is so bizarre and pathetic, and I love everything about him. He's the perfect amount of cringe to me. I love every single second he's on the screen.
So pay up, or be owned!
I wish he could have continued showing up in 100 new seasons of Transformers Animated and taken over a different robot's body every time. My vote's for Jetfire and Jetstorm next. The very idea of the Headmaster as a villain is a prime example of Derek J. Wyatt's brilliance and creativity. Back before time began in the 80s, Transformers Headmasters was a Japanese exclusive sequel series where a smaller Transformer could transform into a head for a larger robot. And here, with a superhero themed Transformers show, Derek had the idea to introduce a super villain called the Headmaster, with the same body snatching capabilities, and got his friend Alex Polinsky to voice him. Transformers Animated loved to reference the past of the franchise in such outside the box, unconventional ways than traditional fan service, and this is one of my favorite examples.
I got away with machines.
Entering the top 10, we have the return of the Headmaster. Once again, it's just funny.
Well, obviously it's a trash pod. I didn't just arrive on this planet yesterday.
Actually,
never mind. Let's go.
Sentinel gets his ass handed to him for 22 minutes. The headmaster manages to have a stronger outing than before, and is even more pathetic and hateable than last time. Animated knew how to have unlikable characters who you secretly really enjoyed watching. Sentinel Prime, as depicted in Transformers Animated, is probably my favorite Transformers character of all time, and I genuinely hate everything about him. A small but intelligent decision on behalf of the writers is the idea of Powell hiring Headmaster to pursue his weapons technology. They could have had Headmaster just fly back into town today, but instead they opt to tie him to the main story in a really clever way. Not only is he back, he's taking Sari's bedroom. Transformers Animated always added extra wrinkles, extra layers to every little story to make them more rich than they had any right to be. Sentinel can't drive in the rain, so he has to run alongside everyone in Where Is Thy Sting? Any other Transformers show would have been content to have him driving that whole episode, but Animated just had character-motivated ideas. The emotional core here is Bumblebee and Bulkhead doing everything in their power to make Sari feel happy and at home. It's also just as funny as the A story.
We didn't have any human food, so we kind of pulled together what we thought you might like to eat.
The conclusion's really heartwarming. It turns out what Sari needs to feel happy and at home is just for Bee and Bulkhead to listen, to be there for her, to let her spill her heart out. It's so sweet, it's so sincere. All Transformers Animated had to be was a toy commercial. But the creative team was so passionate about these characters, letting them live, letting them breathe, letting them feel, regardless of whether or not they had a toy, is what elevates Transformers Animated as a series so high above much of the rest of the franchise.
Oh, her eyes are leaking.
You let them leak as much as you need to. We're here, and you're safe. So whatever it is, you can always talk to us. We'll listen.
Number 9, A Fistful of Energon. The strongest episode of the second season, Fistful is tightly written and engaging as hell. It's an unlikely team up between Prowl and Lockdown, who it took this long to finally talk about. That, to me, is a super inspired character pairing, which the team must have seen potential in after their brief interaction in season 1.
I like your style. I think we can teach each other a few tricks.
Because Lockdown was Ratchet's rival when the show began. Any other Transformers series would have been content having Ratchet and Lockdown square off again and again. Did Breakdown from Prime ever develop a rivalry with anyone besides Bulkhead? Or was he just trapped in a box that the writers wouldn't let him escape from? Until they nonchalantly killed him with no fanfare because they didn't have a toy of him in the US. Him and Bulkhead were starting to vibe, man. Come on, what the hell? Anyway, Animated was dynamic. It was willing to evolve. By the end of the show, Lockdown is more Prowl's enemy than he is Ratchet's. The fact that the characters don't seem to notice Starscream change colors implies to me that in-universe, in the eyes of the characters, these clones are colored exactly like Starscream. Same goes for all the named clones in the rest of the show. That's sort of what this closing shot implies to me. On that note, I love that Lockdown just happened to have armor and Prowl's color scheme that fit him perfectly. But that armor though, oh my god, it looks so cool. It's hard to believe that this armor was script motivated, not to sell a toy. Fistful of Energon is the first character development Prowl's had since Transform and Roll Out. In part 1 and 2, he's a big asshole.
Not this speech again.
A machine that's stronger as a whole than any one component.
Then he almost dies and mellows out by part 3.
A wise bot once told me a machine is stronger than its component parts.
Somewhere along the way, there's an offhanded mention that Prowl never finished his cyber ninja training. Then in episode 4, we learn he likes nature, and then his character remains completely idle until this episode, the midpoint of season 2. Which goes to show how paramount season 3 was to developing his character and giving him the legacy he has. Here, he fires a singular blast from the EMP, and then goes rogue. That's the one thing that sticks out to me is maybe a bit rushed.
Guess you like that EMP generator now, huh?
I wouldn't say that, but it is more useful than I expected. We have stasis cuffs and an EMP generator. What more do we need?
Oh, I don't know. How about a little common sense?
Even with all the storyboards I recovered for this episode, which feature a ton of deleted scenes and cut moments, nothing really fleshes out this abrupt heel turn, but it is alleviated by the fact that this smug asshole side of Prowl was pre-established in the first season. It would have been a lot more jarring if we'd never seen that part of him before.
Hey, you call this a fight? I'll rust before someone wins, and I'm gonna vacuum.
Will you keep quiet?
Number 8. 5 Servos of Doom. This is a fascinating episode. Hasbro said, hey, that armor? We want to make a toy of it, so bring it back to the show. Despite the fact that Prowl's whole character arc last time was letting go of it. Now, they return with this entry, which retcons every previous Lockdown episode. Turns out Prowl's sensei had a helmet which looked just like that armor all along. Turns out Lockdown was actually a skilled former cyber ninja this entire time. And oh, actually Prowl now found a deeper understanding of himself, and now he needs to wear the armor.
I plan to do everything in my power to be worthy of it.
And I don't know how the hell they did it. It makes no sense on paper, even as I'm saying it out loud right now, but it works perfectly. In Fistful of Energon, the central idea is that young bots get so entranced by cool upgrades and armor that they start fully relying on it and overestimate their self-worth. The implication being that Lockdown fell down that path with his obsession with modifications, as Ratchet tries to snap Prowl out of it. But here, as we learn this lesson from George Takei's Master Yokotron, it's the ninja bot, not the weapon. As long as you are aware of your own value, there's no shame in using extra accessories. He strips Prowl of modifications in the flashbacks, and Prowl just doesn't get it until years later in the present when he masters processor over matter and sees he's worthy of wearing the armor, because he is a full package in and of himself.
It is a cyber ninja, not the weapon.
It's a complete 180 course correction, and yet somehow it reinforces the previous episode's themes and makes these episodes retroactively complete each other. It's like Rise of Skywalker undoing Last Jedi, but if it actually worked successfully. Prowl's helmet last time and Yokotron's helmet here are technically 2 different helmets. I think Derek had them designed similar enough so that the toy could plausibly represent both of them. It's still a little silly goofy that Prowl didn't seem to think anything of it last time, but you know what? Actually, who's to say he didn't?
Whatever it takes to get the job done.
He was burying that part of his past back then. He wasn't gonna bring it up to Lockdown of all people. Lockdown also made no indication of his Autobot roots before, but you know what? Why would he? He isn't friends with these people. They're either his bounties or his rivals. It probably wouldn't even make sense for him to have brought that up. I think the craziest thing here is that despite how much you might raise your eyebrow at all of this, there is nothing that contradicts anything. It stretches, it warps, but continuity is maintained. Another example, in episode 1 we established that Optimus wasn't around during the war. He doesn't know anything about it and begs Ratchet for info across the first season. Prowl's also stated to be a young bot in that episode.
That would just mess up my timing.
Young bots. Can't live with them, can't melt them down for spare parts.
Optimus generally seems to be a paternal figure to Prowl, and yet here, we learned that Prowl was dodging the draft late in the war. Prowl was there.
But if Project Omega fails, we will have no choice but to mold them all for a surge against the Decepticons.
There's no way around it. This episode establishes that Prowl is older than Optimus, and it feels so wrong, but nowhere was it ever stated that Prowl was younger than Optimus. They knew what they could get away with here, and it's insane. I think a big component of why it feels so cohesive is that all 3 of these episodes shared the same writer. Andrew Robinson wrote all 3 Lockdown episodes, and they were the only episodes of the show he wrote. It's no coincidence that all 3 of them are nestled up here in the top 10. Lockdown is such a fun character with a perfectly cast celebrity guest star in Lance Henriksen. And Andrew Robinson, meanwhile, is another one of those god-tier industry unsung hero writers like Marty, who's had a hand in almost everything from a generation of childhoods, but isn't a name most people really know. It doesn't help that when you Google Andrew Robinson, the only results are the actor from Star Trek. I've barely talked about the actual plot of the episode, which is a genius one. It's an engaging mystery, an amazing look into Prowl's past that recontextualizes and strengthens his character significantly, and a final battle that, say it with me, goes unfathomably hard. Bringing Sentinel into business with Lockdown was a brilliant idea, and even better is that the business is capturing all of the loose Decepticons from the previous season or so. Jazz starts to defy Sentinel here, doing recon to figure out what he's really up to. All these character beats and story beats are sewn together so organically, so smoothly, so subtly, in such a bold episode that turns a retcon based on toy needs into an essential part of Prowl's story that you couldn't imagine the show without.
There are more important things happening on Cybertron than your little power trip, Sentinel. But when the smoke clears, you and I, we're gonna have it out.
Number 7. This is why I hate machines. This episode brings together an absurd amount of storylines. The activation code saga of Ratchet, RC, and Omega Supreme following Lockdown's memory wipe. Shockwave on the run as a double agent, and Sentinel's emergency takeover of Cybertron following Ultra Magnus' attack, and the Council's disillusion with his reign. All of it is perfectly woven together as a buddy cop adventure with Ratchet and Fanzone, who literally commit treason to investigate the underworld of Cybertron with a ticking clock as Sentinel fights bureaucrats in a bid to destroy Omega Supreme. And all of this by a first-time writer on the show. Rob Hoagie would have had to have read at a minimum like 12 different episode scripts to understand all the context and make this episode make sense. Either that or Marty did an absurd amount of heavy lifting.
No Autobot would be foolish enough to fire on their greatest weapon.
I say we fire on Omega Supreme!
I've always viewed this as one of the greatest episodes of the entire series. There isn't a significant character arc or anything, it doesn't need one. It's jumping from set piece to set piece, the stakes are clear, the action feels important. It's basically the TFA equivalent of a Mission Impossible movie. Ratchet's strong emotions towards Omega Supreme, his desire to keep him alive, tie this whole package together. This is what the show's season finales should have been like. 100 things going on, but well organized and emotionally resonant. I also like that with Ratchet leading this one, everyone in the main cast has had an episode where they square off against Sentinel directly, really establishing him as a far more personal adversary to them than Megatron.
Hey, I think I know this guy.
Then you probably know how I feel about machines.
Silence, Organic! You have no rights here!
This is one of Captain Fanzone's strongest outings, and that's a good thing too, because his only other speaking role in Season 3 is this brief scene in Three's a Crowd. His character just fell off a cliff in relevancy, which is a shame, because I've always seen him as an essential third human protagonist of the show. Obviously less important than Sari and Professor Sumdac, but he's up there with them in terms of appearances. He goes on so many adventures with the Autobots, but it seems like Marty more so only views Sari and Sumdac as having that level of importance. They're the only ones mentioned in the production Bible. They're the only ones we meet in Rollout Part 1. They're the only ones going with the Autobots when it seems like they're about to leave Earth in Season 1's finale. On that note, Fanzone isn't in any season finales. I don't think I'm even making a point right now. I'm just realizing that I've vastly overestimated the importance of Captain Fanzone now that I write this all down. I expressed heavy gripes with Endgame, especially how underwhelming it felt as we watched Decepticon-controlled Omega Supremes attack Earth yet again. This episode has always made me think, what if the finale was Omega Supreme attacking Cybertron? Because that was literally Megatron's goal across the entire season anyways.
Why waste energy on attacking this insignificant planet when we should be conquering Cybertron?
They had to go out of their way to justify the finale taking place on Earth by being like, oh, it's just a field test. I think I understand why it wound up on Earth. The plan for a while was Devastator. Then when Hasbro got cold feet, they probably just mentally swapped Devastator with the Lugna Supremes, so an attack on Cybertron probably just didn't cross their minds as a possibility. But dare I say, it would have been better. Skip all the we can't get RC to transmit the code stuff, just have her activate Omega Supreme at the end of this episode, dive towards Cybertron, and start the two-part finale from there. That cut out like 15 minutes. But whatever, that's just me. Surprise, surprise, I'm off topic again. All of this what-if brainstorming is inspired by how enthralling This Is Why I Hate Machines is. A masterclass episode that highlights how far this show has come.
Don't let this happen to you! I'm Sentinel Prime, and I approve of this message.
Number 6. The Thrill of the Hunt. Almost everyone seems to cite this as a standout, and it's easy to see why. It's so somber compared to the lighthearted tone the show usually celebrated. It's a slow-paced episode dealing with Ratchet's PTSD as he recalls a mission where he wasn't able to save someone. It makes you understand why Ratchet's so hesitant to speak to Optimus about the war. I'm not sure if this is intentional or not, but Optimus basically has the exact same conversation here with Ratchet as he had with Prowl a few episodes ago.
Everything okay? I mean, you want to talk?
No.
But you know you can't talk. To me. About anything.
It's funny if that was on purpose. Makes me wish you could have had the same conversation with Bumblebee and Bulkhead at some point.
Use it. Please. Please.
There's this harshness to the episode. It doesn't hold back on anything, which makes it really unique for the first season, but also paves the way for Season 3's higher stakes to feel like an organic continuation of the same show, rather than an abrupt change of tone. Corey Burton gives one of his best performances here, especially with his softer delivery as a younger Ratchet.
Name's Ratchet. You got that?
Yes, sir.
Lockdown makes a phenomenal first impression with his franchise debut, a ruthless bounty hunter without allegiances and an obsession with collecting upgrades and trophies. His defeat is incredibly satisfying. There's very little I can pull together to say about this episode, because the thrill of the hunt frankly speaks for itself.
You want me to use that EMP to make your pain go away? This was a medical tool meant to heal. You turned it into a weapon.
Number 5. Predacons Rising. Throughout this whole show, I've praised all the times Animated brought previously unrelated story threads together in such seamless ways. Predacons Rising, to me, is the greatest example. Wasp has been on the run from Sentinel for almost a full season, falsely accused of being a double agent, arguably a storyline in and of itself, spun off from the Shockwave storyline. Now, this episode brings him into the crosshairs of Black Arachnia. The Dinobots still serve her, rooting back to last season's Black Friday. She operates out of Meltdown's abandoned lab, dating back to Season 1's Survival of the Fittest. And Sentinel, who's been chasing Wasp, has a very personal history with Black Arachnia going all the way back to the 9th episode of the series, Along Came a Spider. All of this flows together into a paragon of storytelling accomplishment written by story editors of Beast Wars, Bob Forward, and Larry DiTillio. But this wasn't just an idea the writers happened to stumble upon. Wasp, from his very nature, from his design, from his voice, was very clearly destined to eventually become Waspinator from his very first appearance. It was an inevitable collision course. Derek conceived the character of Wasp for this very purpose, becoming Waspinator. Sentinel was shown chasing him from that first appearance. Marty knew where all of this was inevitably going to head since the middle of Season 2. Predacons Rising executes everything perfectly. This is everything you could possibly want from a tense reunion between Alita, Sentinel, and Optimus.
I just never knew, never imagined something this unspeakable could have happened to you.
Okay, I get it. It's bad, but it's not that bad, all right?
No, it's worse. You should have gone offline.
Sentinel's utter hatred of organics stemmed from that encounter, stemmed from organics killing Alita, is what prompts him to completely renounce her and seemingly prepare to take her life before he's interrupted by the emergence of Waspinator, who, rather than being silly comic relief like he was in the 90s, is a terrifying monster in this reinvention.
Waspinator have plans.
And I know Tom Kenny's praises have been sung by everyone on the planet, but the way his voice evolved from Wasp to Waspinator is incredible.
We wanted to thank you for all that extra punishment, Piston Rod. Wasp make Bumblebot pay for ruining Wasp's life!
But Waspinator never forgive!
That means, while recording Auto Boot Camp, Tom Kenny was probably shown Waspinator footage from Beast Wars and reverse engineered his Wasp voice from there. This is probably one of the best examples I can think of how talented and versatile this man actually is. And just a quick goofy silly note, the Dinobots had less and less impressive outings each time they showed up, where they'd always get defeated by the new powerful character the show was introducing. Megatron, leader of the Decepticons? Sure. Ultra Magnus, leader of the Autobots? Sure. But this is where I draw the line. Jetfire and Jetstorm KO the Dinobots effortlessly, without breaking a sweat, laughing about how easy it is.
Are they looking enough distracted to you, brother? Big one still wiggles a little.
I refuse to accept that. It doesn't actually bother me, except that yes it does.
Did you just make that up? No. There's no such thing as a primer prime. It's a real term. Look it up. I'm not gonna look it up.
Number 4, Nature Calls. This is such a simple episode. Lighthearted, devoid of continuity except for the last 30 seconds, and yet I think is one of the shining gems of the series, as do a lot of people given how many compilations have stemmed from just this episode. I think Bumblebee and Prowl's rivalry may have been the strongest dynamic the show had going for it. That makes it even more hurtful to me that we never got to see Bumblebee react to Prowl's death whatsoever. But at least we got this, which is basically 21 minutes of Prowl trying not to lose his mind while Sari and Bumblebee share half a brain cell.
Quick! Turn off your headlights so he can't see us!
Good idea!
This is another showcase of some of the best animation Animated had to offer. The fact that there were only 3 characters on the screen apparently meant the animators were able to go all out in terms of fluidity. Beyond that, The artistic direction is really unique here, as no other episode pushes the cartoony expressions the way that this one does, which in turn makes it very memorable.
As in leaving the comfort of civilization? As in no TV? No music? No games? As in my circuits are gonna fry from boredom?
It's a straightforward monster in the woods story. It's suspenseful, it's funny, it's action-packed, perfectly paced. Nature Calls is yet another wonderful example of what this show can achieve when it's firing on all cylinders. There's a reason Nature Calls has the reputation it has. It's home to some of the all-time greatest writing, animation, and all-around storytelling Transformers animated ever featured.
Where did you even find room for all of this junk?
I'd rather not say.
Number 3, number 2, and number 1. Transwarped, parts 1 to 3. What can I say about Transwarped? More than anything, it just feels like an event. It's the closest thing animated ever got to a movie. For years and years and years, I'd viewed Transwarped as my favorite episode. I questioned, as I set to rewatch the show for the first time in years and lay out this list, if my opinion might change. It didn't. The most significant part of Transwarped to me is the very fact it exists. Season 3 was originally going to open with standalone episodes like Season 2. The first script was complete, written by Michael Ryan. It was called Homecoming, and it dealt with the broken relationship between Sari and her father, while the headmaster took control of Starscream's body in a bid for revenge.
I just want to go home. My real home, Dad.
The second episode was to be called Upgrade, written by Marcia Griffin, and it was about Sari and Ratchet both trying to prove their worth in comparison to each other, culminating in Sari upgrading herself and going on a rampage.
You were right about taking things slow, Ratchet. I should have listened.
The third episode, and an outline stage by Rich Fogel, was Three's a Crowd, which featured the A story we all know, and a B story about Bumblebee transwarping around the galaxy with a plasma dynamic thruster. Then Cartoon Network decided on a whim that it wanted Season 3 to premiere as a 3-part movie, after Transform and Rollout had just done super well. This forced Marty to scramble. He stitched the episodes together, assimilated Rich Fogel's B-plot, and wrote the moving Lugnut story to fill the gap. That's why the plasma dynamic thruster is relevant in so many episodes. It was originally just going to be in one singular one. Then, at the request to age up the show, he wrote the fallout of Megatron's space bridge plan from Season 2, including more of Shockwave double agenting, and most significantly, everything with Omega Supreme. Megatron and Starscream taking control of him, as well as Ratchet's flashbacks to his activation. The end result of this Frankenstein mess, miraculously, is stronger than all of its component parts, with additions that drastically improve the original versions of the episodes, while bringing the series to its emotional height.
You taught me to protect like an Autobot, but all I did was destroy like a Decepticon.
We do what we must, even if it sometimes doesn't make sense.
I don't understand.
I'm not sure I do either.
Ratchet was presumably an essential part of the original version of Upgrade, with him and Sari griping seeming to stem from there, as well as his desire to prove himself, prove he doesn't need the key. But when presented in the same narrative as Ratchet's history with Omega, it means so much more. To specifically see more of what he's been through, more of what he's lost, and how it's affected him makes his fears of being obsolete a lot more poignant. And Marty's weaved in these flashbacks perfectly, as he tends to do.
I know what I said before, but I need that key!
Another genius idea is tying RC's access code from the Thrill of the Hunt into this story, which retroactively makes Lockdown and that episode's flashbacks so much more important to Ratchet's character, to the Great War itself, and the series as a whole.
It's not working!
Perhaps all of its energy was drained during Sari's upgrade. You don't need the key, Ratchet. You can do this without it.
The Allspark key gets drained. It completely disappears from the series, and that sends a message that goes along with the darker tone set by the death of Blur. No one's safe. Transformers Prime tried something similar. It killed Cliffjumper in the first episode to show that anyone could bite the dust at any time, but then it just didn't deliver. 2 B-tier Decepticons were killed in mid to late Season 2, and that's it. Every single Autobot survived the show. And to be fair, a lot of that was budgetary. They just literally didn't have the money to introduce any more than like 7 characters in the preceding 60 episodes. So that really limited who they could kill. Not blaming the writers or anything, but Transformers Animated was in a financial position to commit to a killing spree, with someone going permanently offline every few episodes, including a main cast member in the finale. None of this would have been able to happen if Sari still had her key. Prowl wasn't in a position to die during the first 2 seasons, because the third episode rather foolishly established that death means nothing. I'm not saying shows need to be plagued by death. I'm not the kind of guy who was complaining about Rebels' relative kiddiness compared to where the Clone Wars left off. They both have merit, but you cannot deny that Transformers Animated became a lot more compelling when you had a reason to fear for the characters' well-being. Transwarped also course corrects the Autobots' passivity that plagued the first 2 seasons. There, they make no attempt to look into all these strange happenings in Detroit or to try to contact Cybertron and let them know they have the Allspark. In season 2, they have less of an excuse. They know Decepticons are somewhere on this planet, endangering humanity with their presence, and there's just a singular episode where Bumblebee decides to look for them before giving up. It's a distracting amount of inaction when so much is at stake. But here, the Autobots have 2 missions throughout the season. With the loss of Teletran 1, they need to build a space bridge and contact Cybertron to let them know about Shockwave. They also go out on their own accord to capture the loose Decepticons, rather than just happening to run into them in traffic like they would last season. Almost half the episodes in the season show the Autobots working on achieving these goals, which is even more than was necessary. They feel like truly active protagonists between episodes. And that's part of why the 3rd season has such a pulse to it. There is one thing I wish Transwarped could have done differently. I think it stems from how many times I've seen the special and thought about all the options and possibilities, but Sorry should have been unleashed against Omega Supreme.
Ratchet, you stay behind with Sorry.
But there's nothing more I can do for her now.
I know, but I may need you to undo something.
You're not actually suggesting we unleash an uncontrollable Sorry on Omega Supreme, are you?
I'm hoping we won't have to.
Like, come on, why even bring that up if you're not gonna do it?
Ratchet, remember that thing I was hoping we wouldn't have to do? Well, it looks like we may have to.
Not just because it could have been an insane action sequence, but also because it would have tied the whole thing together. Transwarped has 2 major trains of thought running throughout it. Sorry's new robotic powers that lead to her upgrade, and Megatron's failed space bridge plan which leads to him taking control of Omega Supreme. Ratchet wound up as a sort of anchor that tethers both of these 2 together. But as it stands now, Sorry's story completely ends 1/3 of the way through part 3, and she's fully absent for the last 14 minutes of this 66-minute event. I think Sorry participating in the climax, maybe mastering her powers in the process, would have made Transwarped feel perfectly cohesive.
Thanks for saving my motherboard out there.
Guess this old butt isn't so obsolete after all.
There's so much happening, and yet it all has ample time to breathe. It's all juggled appropriate and given just the right amount of time dedicated to it. The elegant pace of Transwarp does honestly make me believe that TFA could have a satisfying conclusion in a 66-minute special like this. You have to sacrifice some little things. Are we losing sleep over Meltdown? But if Marty works as efficiently as he did here, then what I consider the 3 core pillars of the show's incompletion, Sorry, Sentinel, and Black Arachnia, could get some sort of worthwhile send-off, with Devastator's combination and Waspinator's plans hopefully fitting into the cracks somewhere. Though obviously a whole season would be ideal.
So, I'm like part Cybertronian? Cool, we're like cousins!
And thank you for listening to this entire tirade I went on. I adore this show, as you may have gathered from the later segments of this video. What do you think of my rankings? Do you agree with my opinions? Or are you wrong? Please let me know in the comments below.